focus in on calendars or times or numbers and dates. But at any rate, yeah, I had certain expectations of the influx of spiritual energy of that time frame regarding the trip itself and then the weekend after. But that was okay for me, and I had no over or under expectations at all. And I didn't really have very many preconceived ideas whatsoever. In other words, regarding my participation in that time frame, as well as the participation of all of you people, or all of we people, I could have been anywhere and still felt fully comfortable that I was an integral part of not only our group or the group, but other groups, and the biggest group of all, meaning the human condition. Was everybody on the Big Blue Marble. And in other words, let me put it this way, it was not necessary for me to go prior to leaving on the trip. Now, as things developed extremely synchronistically, and the fortune that I was able to go, and especially I have to focus in, where I can't help it, on Elaine's ability to go.
Right.
I mean, that was just...
talk about attitudinal changes.
Again, videotape.
Right.
You know, if we could have on this videotape, I mean, just followed, no dialogue at all, just followed and shown physically, visually shown Elaine a week before the Sedona trip. And then this day, no matter what's happening in her life right now, in other words, the fact that she's in a chaotic state of losing her job, which should be devastating for most people, especially an Elaine Sawyer, being, you know, that's such a priority in her life, and that it represents her self-esteem, her self-worth, where many people are luckier saying, well, this is simply employment for the money to be who I am, to enhance the person that I am. With Elaine, it's more of a representation of that. It's, you know, such...
her just sense of being at peace and knowing that if one door closes, another will open, and she'll be where she
and
needs
for
to
the
be
first time in her life.
Yeah.
For the first time in her life. Did I do that? No way. Did you do that? No way. Did the priesthood do that? No way. Did Sedona do that? No way. You know, it was magical there. Right. But collectively, every single one of those things, persons, places, and time frame did do that. But does that take away from Elaine's ability to simply have, on her own, an attitudinal change? Doesn't deny it at all. It only enhances it. Yes, it was a result of all of that, but it was equally and at the same time Elaine's ability to intuitively, magically, manipulatively, or just, gee, it's damn time I changed my attitude. In other words, it all took place, and it was a remarkable measurement. I mean, for those of you people who have known Elaine before, especially visually, I mean, I've had 5 neighbors since we've gotten back ask Elaine, gee, Elaine, is something wrong? You know, it's funny how you ask somebody, you see it change, and say, something wrong? One person asked and said, no, why? Said, well, I've just noticed that you haven't been doing the things that you normally do. And then in a long dialogue, it was, well, you normally like scurry around and demand of yourself to get the piece of paper out on the lawn with her fanatical cleaning, and that she's walking a little slower nowadays. And of course, we can laugh at that because we know her. But I mean, these are such positive changes. And no, it didn't require the plane trip, but my God, the plane trip was so perfect. The magic that took place there. And I mean, I use that word very cheerfully. I don't usually use that word, but it was magical. And the many people who were on that trip and so on and have come back to face additional chaos and judgmental situations and so on, bear with that for right now. I mean, it's almost impossible to have major positive change without a degree of chaos. The change itself might be chaotic, or in a form of chaos, or you may be experiencing chaos inside yourself without understanding any of it. It's, gee, I just feel strange or different or uneasy or insecure or something like this. And it's that you're going through a stepping stone or making a major breakthrough. and that the end result will almost for sure be much more positive in nature and much more assuredly or secure or definite. And a lot of people, as of this taping, a lot of people are in a chaotic state and questioning, even was it worth it for me to go on this trip? And, trust my judgment that I can't think. I'm zeroing in on 104 people plus a couple people that showed up magically and synchronistically. Starts with an S? What was the Indian woman's name?
Sakina.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't plan to go on the Sedona trip.
Right.
Right. And I mean, was she the 105th person? Sure. And in other words, I'm focusing on 105 or more people, a few more, that have been affected by or participated in the trip. And for all of those people, I cannot think of, it's too bad about, Miss, Mrs., or Mr. anybody.
Yeah.
And I would say it's a shame about that. I can't see that it's a shame regarding anybody, even though right now, in fact, even viewing this tape, that they might be saying, yeah, what sense I got back,
Yeah, but what's interesting is if you can remain centered in chaos, then that's the test.
Major stepping stone, sure.
Yeah. It's easy to stay centered when everything's going well.
Several years ago, without knowing ahead of time, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's a perfect example of a manipulative attitudinal change, a demand of myself on Tom Sawyer's attitudinal change, and my general attitude at the time that I am Tom Sawyer in this way, and then knowing and spiritually knowing that my attitude has got to be tried. In other words, this new attitude has got to be tested or tried or proven, if you will. And it was the time where I turned and looked into the eyes of that man that was about to rape a little girl. And I was able to love that man. That's a perfect example in a way. And it's chaotic in my life to this day. Mm-hmm. Those the emotions involved are for the compassion for the spirituality of the whole scenario, my spirituality, my attitudinal changes that were proven that day. It's so multifold that I still get teary-eyed and so on regarding it, but that day, an hour before that time, 1 hour before, I was a Tom Sawyer who justifiably would have grabbed a hold of with my hand and possibly killed that man for who he was. And I'm saying justifiably so. In other words, morally and even to a degree legally, I could have manipulated that and killed that man in the participation of a rape of a little girl and been vindicated legally, morally, and I would have been a hero. And it didn't turn out that way. It was a very, very synchronistic event in my life, and that thank God for me and thank God for God that I was able to take the little girl's hand and just turn and look into that man's eyes. Now, I don't want to, and I don't think I will ever give too many more details about afterwards regarding other individuals, meaning that man and that little girl. But I just want to kind of throw out the effect of my attitude at that, my newly forced attitude at that moment. And what did my new attitude at that instant have to do with and within that man? Because that man was just a short distance away, and he was also looking straight into my eyes. And what did he experience? Did he know that I knew who he was? Probably not. But what effect, if any, did my eyesight and my being and my attitude have on that man? And it's not up to me to ever give either my opinion or something that I might know spiritually or intuitively or psychically. I don't think that would be justifiable, at least at this point in time. But think about it. I mean, just think about it. In other words, if that man would have met me a year before with my general attitude, would he be scared? Would he be changed? Would he be threatened? Would he be able to function normally within his being? And I can promise you that with the knowledge that he was in fact a person with the potential to rape, I promise you that he would have been adversely affected. He would have been harmed. He would have been, attitudinally I'm saying, he would have been harmed. He would have been defensive. He would have been chaotic. He would have been upset. He would have been scared. I promise you that. Now, did he not experience any of those things with the meeting of me that day? And of course, I can state that at least many of those things did not take place, and thank God for that. I mean, just
Because he felt love rather than hatred. On some level.
right on some level, yes. But even if you hesitate saying, did he really experience love? Because you'd have to get his interpretation of that. He experienced love, but what I can promise you is he did not experience righteousness, macho one-upsmanship. I'm better than you. Don't push me. Or I have the right or ability to kill you and be a hero or be righteous or justifiable. I mean, he did not experience
All the negative.
hatred and negative. Again, you don't have to know the exact answer, but what's the difference? And can our attitude or your attitude make that much difference? And it can never be overemphasized. I wish that I could give the perfect analogy, so to speak, because sometimes that works best regarding proving or showing something as ambiguous as an attitude.
I remember when I worked for Xerox, I used to go to this little drugstore for lunch, and there was this long lunch counter, and there were these two waitresses that would just throw everything in front of you and say, "What do you want?" You know, and growl at you. And there was this one woman who would lay down the napkins and the silver as if you were in the Waldorf Astoria or something. I mean, all her teeth were so bad, you just thought the pain she must be in. And yet, every person who sat in like her 6-seat area was treated so specially. And people would line up with just a lunch hour with seats available everywhere else, waiting to just be in her presence, you know. And here, you know, waitressing can be a really rough situation, and she was just taking, it was like bloom where you're planted, you know. She was taking the situation she was given and just being as loving and as kind as she could possibly be. And she probably touched more people over the years that she worked there.
And often without saying a word.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just that sense of respect and love.
I told my son Tim that, Tim, can you imagine the virus of attitude that would be so contagious that everybody would get it? I mean, you know, and it was, trust me that he heard the words. He,
Yeah.
you know, heard the words, but he heard what I was saying. As he was listening to what I was saying from my heart and my mind. And that the few words that I said were right.
Maybe we should take a bit of a break.
Yeah.
What?
I said, you know, oh, you knew they were still here? Every 15 minutes they hear like a giggle. It's like die down. I'd be like, oh, they must have left and then.
There are things in nature and spirituality that are so serious that all you can do is laugh.
Are we going?
Yes,
to we're going to bring you back to love bombing versus hate bombing.
Yeah, and the, what was that other word I used? The disproportionate. Disproportionate. Yeah, thank you. Disproportionate love bombing versus hate bombing. Well, first of all, it's kind of a ridiculous phrase, hate bombing, but let's be honest that we have in our lifetime disliked and or disliked immensely, therefore that we're hated individuals, situations, intolerable situations, and so on. and therefore wished evil or wish dread or wish something other than love to and toward individuals, people, places, or things. And in other words, a scenario of, can you constantly barrage somebody with negativity? Now, again, this is a watered down version of, say, a hate bombing situation. The disproportionate situation that I want to bring to mind is that something that you cannot do, that cannot be done, is you cannot divide, conquer, or annihilate love. Disproportionately, we can divide, conquer, and annihilate hate. So in other words, even though they're considered antonyms or opposites, they are not equal opposites. In other words, you can divide and conquer and upgrade love. You can possibly, or I meant to say hate, you can possibly upgrade forms of love, but capital letter L, in other words, love, unconditional love, you can no more improve on, and you cannot kill it, you cannot divide it, you cannot conquer it. Yeah, Tim Sawyer.
Yeah.
Would you like to come in and listen?
No.
Okay. Thank you. I love you.
Right.
Yeah, we talked about our conversation last night when I was talking about attitudes in regards to Czechoslovakia and so on. Okay, so we're just finishing that tape up.
So does this mean that I can still use 30 seconds microwave?
Yeah, no, we don't need the interruption, right?
But I love you anyway.
Yes, but I love you anyway.
We should go right into loving relationships
There you
between
go.
parents and
Yes.
teenagers.
Oh, yeah, in fact, just let me summarize the disproportionate situation. Attitudinal changes. How much, and rather than really dwell on how much harm or dis-ease are you creating in your spouse's life or your friend's life or people around you by having negative attitudes? Well, it's aggravating. It has a negative effect. It is sometimes contagious. You can sometimes promulgate dis-ease or a disease or hatred and things of that nature by walking around with a negative attitude, or shall we dare say the worst scenario of walking around with any kind of hatred in your heart or in your mind. And that's sad, and of course you don't need much of a measurement to know that that's not the best scenario. And in the best of times, that certainly is not what you say, let's see, next week I think I'll be real nasty and negative and hate everybody. Because you don't usually plan something like that. You're usually often considered a victim of circumstances or self-proclaimed righteousness or victim and say, well, I know I'm in a bad mood, but it's not my fault. And it's right away, rather than to deal with yourself and the fact that you are promulgating this negative attitude, that you are justified or it's not your fault or you're being manipulated by outside sources and forces. And of course, intellectually, we know that that is foolishness. Okay, that's a summarize of negative aspects. And how much power does it have? Well, it has the power to affect other people negatively. They have free will and they can accept or reject it. And the sad part is, in our competition of the human condition and our righteousness and our familiarity with especially spouses, where the degree of familiarity is at its utmost, we have a tendency to sword fight or to compete and to do one-upsmanships. And, well, if I'm a jerk, you're a bigger jerk. When if thought about ahead of time, which often can't be done, because if, for instance, you know that next Tuesday, your spouse is going to have a real serious problem, and you're going to have to still spend time with, in the company of, a serious problemed person. If you could think about that ahead of time often, you would say, well, I think that I'll try to love bomb that person or stay out of that person's space or way and allow them, if they need to deal with their own personal negativity, lovingly and politely just say, well, I can appreciate your right to be in a negative fashion, but I don't think this is going to enhance my life. and I would prefer to just allow you this time or space and get the hell out. Fight or flight. And we often have a tendency to wish to fight rather than to flight. And I'm not talking about literally or physically running away. I mean, somebody argues with you, and if you just smile and say, like your daughter said the other day, Carol, I love you, big sister.
Yes.
And often,
pretty
and again, now attitudes. Now, you know as well as I do, she was thinking both that this is a non-confrontational way, but it's also, she was thinking simultaneously, I'm as sure as I can be, that this was the worst name calling that she could do.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's plowing right back into the negative that was forced onto her, so to speak.
Right.
And she's just doing the mirrored image. And sometimes that's more devastating because we humans have a tendency not to want to admit to our own inadequacies. And that it's not my fault I'm in a bad mood, she, he, or it, outside sources and forces. Yeah. So with free will and so on, we have the right to accept or reject all of that. And somebody says, yeah, well, when somebody's pounding the hell out of you physically, you're going to reject that? Well, that's too late to think in terms of acceptance or rejection. The time was maybe way back 25 years ago in Tom Sawyer's life, and the very, very first time that I nudged, pushed, shoved, or raised my voice to an Elaine Powers, who became Elaine Sawyer in spite of all of that. And the very first time that I did that voluntarily, if instead of cowing down and saying nothing and having the argument stop and having it mechanically work for me, because I'm the victor because I made you shut up and made you stop saying or doing this thing, or I nudged you and that scared you enough to put you in your place. I mean, I'm purposely saying this arrogantly. If that very first time something like that happened, instead of accepting my superiority, my dominance, and these are quotes, I don't mean these literally, because somebody's sitting there thinking, oh my God, did he really think he was superior? Well, in fact, I did. And at that time I did. So yes to that. But there's the superiority, the dominance, that's maybe even a better phrase, because did in fact Elaine, the very first time that happened, accept her responsibility for being a subordinate, the dictionary definition of subordinate, and that I was the dominant person, and that she said, yes, if you raise your voice, I will stop and it will work, temporarily as it may be. But in other words, this is fight or flight, and I raise my voice or nudge her, and she cows down and stops, and I'm the victor, at least mentally, at least psychologically. So that progressed over 20-some years of marriage into a pattern and so on. Now, is this my fault for being stupid enough to not see that this is the person that I love? And if I planned a day ahead, I know I really love Elaine. I mean, in fact, I'm thinking of marrying this girl. I think I'll nudge her, or I think I'll raise my voice and scare her. You see, it doesn't happen that way. It happens much more subtly than that. And where does the original acceptance or rejection come into what turned out to be a degree of physical abuse in our marriage? From me toward Elaine, mostly. There's a physical. I'm bigger, stronger than she is. And have I ever slapped Elaine? I'm sorry to say yes, that I have. And in other words, and by no means am I going to say, well, it's not my fault because she accepted it. See, that's not the time to consider fight or flight or acceptance or rejection. But regarding anything, even as intensive as that, what if the second time I did that, not so necessarily the first time, because a gentle little nudge or the pushing for power, who's going to be the boss in this house, you or me? And it doesn't much matter because, again, acceptance or rejection, it can be either the male or the female or whomever. In other words, live-in partners, it can be anybody, either one or the other. It's rarely both equally. It's very often regarding aspects and so on that there is a dominant person with finances, a dominant person with decisions. In emergency situations, one serves, the other leads, so to speak. And so rather than to figure things like that out, it's usually testing. It's usually, there are people who demand to be leaders. There you have confrontations. But then the first time that that's confronted with, do we or do you or does anybody accept it or reject it? And that's when you have the ability. Now, the second or third time that, say, for instance, I raise my voice with the nudge, in other words, the first physical confrontation of, well, I told you to shut up and you're not shutting up. Now, damn it, shut up. And a nudge, say, with an elbow or something like that. Or eventually a slap. If she, Elaine, or somebody else would have interfered with love in their heart and said,